Okay. All right, we're going to get started here in a second. Okay, welcome everyone to seminar. Just a couple announcements. Just a reminder that next week we, instead of seminar, we have our wonderful event. That's our lightning talks and poster sessions, and that will not be a hybrid event. It will be only in person and research commons in the library. We'll have some light snacks and a wonderful array of sparkling waters as usual. And it's always a great time to come see everyone and chat and give our wonderful students some feedback on their research. As usual, if you're online, please use the Q&A and not the chat to submit your questions. And if you have a clarifying question, we'll address it, when it comes in. But if it's a more substantive question, we'll wait till the end. So we're all super excited today. We have a great panel on ad health, and it'll feature Bob Hummer, who we're happy to have here from North Carolina, who's the director of ad health and professor of sociology at UNC. And of course, the past PA president. We're kind of we got a little theme going here. We had Sanal last week and Dr. Hummer this week. And we'll also hear from Lucy Herbert, who's the assistant research professor at Washington State University in the Institute for Research and Education to Advance Community Health and the Partnerships for Native Health at Washington State University, and our very own research scientist here at CSDE, Phil Hurwitz, who is also the director of the UW Data Collaborative. So I think, Phil, that you can take it away. And let me just hide some things here on the screen. How do we do this? Oh, down here, sorry. No. There we go.
Hi, thank you, Jessica. It's great to be here, and it's really happy to have our guests from UNC and WSU. I should have provided a slide that gave the overview of the entire session, but essentially what I'm going to do is talk about the UW Data Collaborative, which is our secure storage platform. Then we'll shift to the two folks from UNC. And then Lucy will provide some research that she has done using the ad health data, and then hopefully have a few minutes for questions at the end. So hopefully mine will be the fastest of this. First, I'd like to say that we're supported, the UW Data Collaborative supported by the UW Population Health Initiative, Urban at UW, the UW Libraries Student Technology Fee, UW IT, our center grant, of course, with the NICHD, and then we couldn't do any of this without the IT group at CSD. So the motivation is that there's an expanding number, size, and types of complex social data. There's a really high value to research, a lot of opportunities that require access to very sensitive data. So because of the sensitivity of these data, security is really important. At the same time, there are growing expectations for open access and reproducibility. And so there's a need for standardized protocols and shared infrastructure for efficiencies. And this critical infrastructure to meet all of these new demands is missing at most universities, and it's missing mostly at UW. But we do have this data collaborative, which has a number of different goals, including fostering collaboration, equalizing accessibility. So a lot of the data sets that we have are really expensive to get, and the software is really expensive, but we've provided a platform where just about anybody, as long as they get authorization, can use these data sets and systems. This is to really bring about new collaborative efforts and promote data discovery. And so we have a really highly secure, robust computing environment that protects sensitive data. It provides state-of-the-art analytic environments with really high-powered computers and state-of-the-art software, and fills a research infrastructure gap at UW. As of March 2023, we have, it looks like, a dozen data sets that are generally available, and a few more data sets that are really just for specific people doing their own research projects. How does this all work? Well, imagine that you're a user on the public internet. You would first need to go through the UW firewall and then use Husky OnNet with Duo Mobile. That would then get you into the UW Data Collaborative. And then within the DC, we have these servers that have all of these data sets and software. You would do your research and then create some de-identified data sets, which then you would request for a data transfer. I look at all of those data sets that are requested to come off. And as long as there's no sensitive data, then we provide those data sets back to you. And if you're a student, you're going to do your great publications, get your degree. And this is a way that we can provide is really high quality and sensitive data sets in a way that allows you to do your research. As of the end of February this year, we had a lot of different users. You can see that UW Pharmacy has the greatest number of 44 users. Primarily, this is because we're hosting the market scan data set, which is all claims, medical claims, insurance claims, procedures. As of the end of February, we've had 901 data transfer requests. So this is either data coming in or coming out of the system. And then we have had a number of different requests increase, they change over time. And the most important part here really is the products that we've generated from the UW-DC. So you can see that there's we've had collaborations, posters, presentations, theses, grants, and publications. So the data sets that we've had on the DC have provided the ability to have a lot of peer-reviewed publications. We have a lot of opportunities. We're meeting NSF and NIH data sharing requirements. We're creating accessible data. There are a lot of challenges. Data use agreements frequently take a lot of effort just to get the contracts done. Challenges are that there are always increasing security requirements. And so we don't have just a static thing set up. We have to continually make the systems more secure. And standards are always changing. There's an expectation of increased demand for these types of data. And so publicizing and generating support is always a challenge, including generating online financial support. So that's the background to the system. And then on the system, we're hosting the AdHealth data. And we'll shift now to Bob, who will talk about his role in the AdHealth study. How we switch.
For the folks online, we didn't see any slides switch in the last progress in the last presentation. I don't know if there's.
Oh no, the slides are on here.
Yeah,
So,
sorry.
Oh, sorry about that.
So we need to go.
Oh no, we just need to share. Slides here. Where? Michaela? Where are these slides? Sorry, y'all. Oh, here they are. Are making it.
Jessica, or do I use this?
Use the space bar or arrows like
On
that.
this one? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you all. Thanks, Phil, for the introduction, and thanks, Michaela and Jessica, for having us. I want to acknowledge Sydney Will, who's online there. Sydney, maybe you can wave. Yeah, there's Sydney. She's the wonderful data dissemination and contracts manager for Ad Health. So when people get access to the data, she's the person that helps, that manages that process. And we've got thousands of users. So Sydney helps make that happen. So she'll come on a little later to talk about actually getting access to the data and how that works, if you got any questions about that. So my role here is in the next few minutes is just to give you a little bit of background on Ad Health data, encourage you, if you're not a user yet, to explore using our data, and provide a little bit of sneak peek ahead about we're in the field right now with collecting more data, and to talk about that as well. This one.
You gotta click, I guess. Now it's going.
Okay. Okay, so a little bit about Ad Health. Some of you are users, others are not. Ad Health goes back to a congressional mandate in 1993 to fund for the National Institutes of Health to fund the study of adolescent health in our country. At the time, HIV and AIDS was a really huge deal in the country, still is, of course, but we knew very little as a country about sexual behavior, about drug use and so forth among adolescents in the country. So UNC at the time applied for the grant to fund this study and was awarded that, and Ad Health came into being in 1994-95. And it was initially a two-wave study. It was going to be 2 waves, and that was going to be it. And then through some ingenuity from Kathy Harris and Dick Udry at the time, who were directors of Ad Health, it later became this much longer longitudinal study that, of course, continues to unfold. It was renamed in 2014 with the idea that adolescents don't stay adolescents forever, thankfully. And we've all been there, and that folks are now adults and they're now moving into their 40s. So the study was renamed then. In 2016, Congress gave Ad Health the Golden Goose Award, which is kind of the studies that lay the golden scientific eggs for Ad Health. And we've had something over 5,000 peer-reviewed publications for using the Ad Health data over time. Right now, there's about a paper a day being produced using Ad Health data. So it's been a very important data set for many fields in the social sciences and health sciences across that time. And most recently, our team was awarded the grant from NIA and 5 other co-funders to run wave 6 of Ad Health with it, which I'll talk a little bit about today. We're in the field right now collecting some really exciting data. Okay, this is a busy slide, but the point of this slide about the Ad Health sampling design is that the key take home here is that this was a school-based study. Okay, so back in the mid-1990s, the folks, the PIs of Ad Health obtained a list of all the high schools in the United States, and they took a sample of 80 of those high schools. And so and then they added feeder schools, middle schools or junior highs to them. So all of the participants in Ad Health came from these schools. So there's a lot of people who in Ad Health who know each other and went to same schools together. So there's tremendous emphasis on social context right from the get-go in Ad Health, from the schools and neighborhoods in which these adolescents came from, families in which they came from, and then they've been followed ever since. There were also some special samples added to Ad Health that look at the bottom. So for example, if one of a pair of twins was included in the original design, it's like, oh, let's interview your twin as well. So there was a lot of interest at the time in adding racial and ethnic minority groups to the sample, to genetic subsample, and so forth. So it's a complex sample design, but when weighted, Ad Health data represents the population of adolescents who were in American high schools and middle schools in the mid-1990s. Okay, so this is just we care a lot about context and continue to. Individuals are moving through time. but also we continue to measure the context in which they're embedded as well as an important part of the study. Again, a little bit here, it goes back to wave one, what we say that was the initial design, that the left side shows that there's a lot of people who are siblings, identical twins, fraternal twins, within this kind of initial sample of over 20,000 individuals in Ad Health, a lot of family structure diversity as well, given Ad Health's initial design. And this didn't show up very well. The columns kind of got messed up, but there's a tremendous amount of racial and ethnic diversity in the Ad Health sample as well to facilitate work on health disparities. So, for example, 17% of the sample members in Ad Health, based on one measure of racial and ethnic identity, were Latina. 22% Black, and so forth. So there's these oversamples helped to facilitate health disparities work over the years. Okay, Ad Health grows up, and now, well, you can almost see at the bottom of the slide, we're in wave 6 right now, so waves in rows here. Wave 1 through 5 data are available. So these data include survey data that's coming down the middle there, lots of data on their folks' social lives, their attitudes, their work and their schooling and so forth, their family lives, their sexual behavior and so forth. On the far right, you can see the biological data collection we've added to over the years. That in wave 5, for example, we took venous blood samples from a large number of folks in our samples. So we have lots of data available on things like metabolic functioning, inflammation, cardiovascular functioning, and so forth. We have genetic data available for folks, for most of the folks in Ad Health. So there's tremendous not only survey data, biological data. The top of the slide shows that we have contextual data specific to all kinds of different levels of geography, as well as institutions like schools and so on. And we continue to add birth and death records for folks who, for when they're born, if they die, we get their death records. And at the bottom, which you really can't see because of how Zoom is working here, is that we're in wave 6 right now and collecting both the survey data, the biological data, the contextual data in wave 6. And I'll go into some detail on that after Sydney talks about accessing the waves 1 through 5 data that are currently available. Oh, finally, we also got parent data. We got the original survey, wave 1, you can see in the top row that most parents answered a survey about their kids as well. And 3,000 of those parents were followed up just recently. So there's longitudinal data on subsample of parents as well. We're hoping to add to the parent data as well. And on the left side, we've got a data set coming out that says sexual orientation, gender identity, and health. Those survey data for a subsample of Ad Health respondents are coming out probably next month. So that'll be another great addition to our data archive. Okay, so some of the things that people have been doing here in terms of Ad Health data, a lot of folks now are looking at cardiovascular health in Ad Health, looking at metabolic risk, looking at early life exposures and cardiometabolic health in early midlife. A lot of focus on disparities in the life course. When do disparities form? What are the factors in which health disparities are created? When are they wide? When are they narrow, and so forth, depending on different kinds of social contexts. A lot of folks interested in genetics and health in Ad Health. So it's one of the amazing data sets where you can look at, people's genetics, their environment, and try to figure out, is it both, is it one or the other, and so forth, to influence their health and their health behavior. And then a number of papers, most recently looking at emerging trends at midlife, helping to understand these phenomena of deaths of despair, of drug use, of suicide risk, and so on, using these data. So these are just some examples. Again, there's a paper a day coming out. No one can keep up with all this, but there's such a rich, amazing longitudinal data set, intergenerational data sets, so we have parents and kids to look at an amazing amount of topics using these data. Okay, so Sydney now online will move forward from here, talking about how to get access to the data.
Yes, and Bob, if you will, when I'm ready, I'll tell you to move to the next slide because I don't think I can actually control it from here, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So Ad Health has public use data and restricted use data. The public use data is waves 1 through 5 survey and biomarker data. It is a smaller sample. It does not include the entire sample, and that smaller sample is 1/3 of the total AdHealth sample from the core and high education Black samples. We have over 50,000 plus researchers that have used this public use data over the years. It is the most highly utilized data set in ICPR's archive for many, many years. And it is used often in college classes to practice analyzing the data, to really get people's hands on data and how to work with it, which is also great. And then restricted use data, for example, includes a lot of the survey, biomarker, contextual, and surveillance data, as Bob mentioned earlier. It also includes genetic data. It is the full sample, and currently we have over 400, roughly around 400, but sometimes over 400 contracts at any given time with many multiple users. And Bob, if you'll go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. The public use data is available through ICPSR. There is a data use agreement that does have to be signed, well, filled out and signed to get access to that data, but it is free of charge. The restricted use data is available through a renewable 3-year contract. So there is an asterisk there. There are a few data sets that have additional requirements, and there is the genetic data that is available through GWAS, our GWAS data available through dbGaP. And we do have a linking file that we can help you get access to link the AdHealth data to that dbGaP data. Researchers with a terminal degree and a research faculty position can apply for a contract. There is a one-time processing fee of $1,000 for the data, but when you renew, you do not have to pay that $1,000 again. And it does include any of the data that you request. It's not just per data set, thankfully. There is a data use agreement that you do have to sign with your institution. And there is a security plan that must be filled out that is reviewed by our security administrator. We also require an IRB approval, and there are no restrictions on the number of users on a contract. So if you are a professor and you have plenty of students under you that are interested in using the AdHealth data, you can add as many of your students as you feel comfortable advising and making sure that they are following the proper security requirements of using the data. So right now, there are currently 3 different types of security plans that are available for use: standalone computer, external hard drive, and remote compute server, and which would be similar to what University of Washington is using. UNC SRW is a new security plan that we are planning to be rolling out. And right now, it's looking like it will be the only security plan for disseminating Wave 6, which is really exciting. It is a Windows remote compute server housed at UNC, so that everyone can log into our server and use the data without having to have their own setup. And there's a couple guides and tools and codebooks and user guide websites that we have. So the AdHealth website is a great resource. If you're interested, if you're not using the AdHealth data or you're interested in new data that you haven't realized that we have, please go to our website. We have data descriptions for each of the data sets. We have code books for each of the data sets and the user guides for many of the data sets. We also have the AdHealth Navigator, which I'm going to show to you in just a few minutes, which is a searchable tool for all of our restricted use data except for the romantic pair data. And then we have a very extensive frequently asked questions. There's very extensive. You can search it. It is accordion style. There's a lot of information there. I would search there first, but if you continue to have questions, please don't hesitate to email us, which there is a contact page on the next slide that we will get to. But first, I'm going to show you the AdHealth Navigator, if that is okay. Oh, okay. Bob, is it possible? It says I can't share while someone is screen sharing. So I apologize. Oh, perfect. That works. So this is the AdHealth Navigator, and there's 2 ways to use it. If you scroll down, there is the Ad Health series, and it has all of our data sets based on WAVE. And you can go through and look at, it has descriptions, but you can go through all the data sets per WAVE that are available to use and actually look at all of the variables. The other way to look at it is if you go to the Explore button at the very top, and then click on Ad Health Topics. You can also look at all of the main WAVE data or the survey data in topics. So if there's something that you're particularly looking at, Bob, if you could go to demographics and hit the plus sign next to demographics. So there are topics inside of topics. And if you'll go down to race, so here's a good example. You can see what questions were asked in the survey and then which variables show up in which data set that have the same question. So you can look at the variables across. And if Bob, if you want to just click on one that has like, what is your race, other or Asian, probably the American Indian, that would work. Oh, which one? Oh, Asian. Sorry, that was a bad one. If you'll close that. I apologize. It's a little slower. If you might want to refresh the page. I apologize. If you try clicking the refresh button to the right of the right arrow at the top of the left-hand corner and see if that fixes it. Yes, okay. Sorry about that. If you go back to demographics. And click on the plus sign next to demographics. It basically lists everything in demographics, but then there are subcategories under there. And if you go down to weight, that's another good one. And if you, Bob, if you click on what is your weight, this was asked in every single one of our waves. It will show you, hopefully. It will show you box and whisker plot because this was a numerical data variable. And so then it also will give you the min, median, max, first quartile, third quartile for each of the data set variables, which is kind of interesting because you can actually see how the weight has increased over the 5 waves for the actual population. And then you can actually go into the data set from there. But I just wanted to show you some ways that people can actually go into the topics, see what we've asked, which variables there are, in which waves, which data sets. Right now, it is only school, parent, and waves 1 through 5 survey, but we are working on adding the contextual data as well. The goal is to have every single one of our data sets in here, but right now it is just the main wave survey data and in school and parent. Okay, thank you, Bob. And finally, if you want more information on how to get these data sets, how to obtain them, how to apply for those contracts, please visit our website or visit the Contact Us page and send us an email. We'll be happy to help you. We're here to help. If there's anything that you run into, we will get back to you as quickly as possible with an answer.
Thank you, Cindy. And I want to mention that navigator tool that Cindy, that I was really bad going through, but she's, it's an amazing tool to discover what variables are there, where are they across waves, basic distributions and so forth. So like if you're thinking about dissertation project or whatever, look up those variables and say, I can see that that's there, exactly how things are measured and so forth. Just Cindy really worked years on building that, and it's been an amazing discovery tool for users to get into the data. Okay, so looking ahead to wave 6 really quick before we turn to Lucy. We were funded largely by the National Institute on Aging. These folks are no longer adolescents, they're in their 40s. And so we're in the field right now. The overall goal of this project is we are data producers and disseminators. We're not collecting these data for ourselves, although I would love to use the data. Well, what we want to do is collect and disseminate high quality data for the nationwide and actually worldwide user community to use these data on life course determinants and trajectories of health, cognition, health behavior, and health disparities among this nationally representative population. There's really nothing else like this for within the US context for a cohort that's been followed now for over 25 years. We have HRS for older Americans, so longitudinal data, and we have like the Fragile Future Family Study at the younger ages, a few others, but for this cohort moving through time as large as it is, there's really nothing like this. In the columns got thrown off here, I'm not sure why, but for wave 6, the things that we're collecting survey data. We try to go after everybody. We had 20,745 folks in wave 1. We try to find them all, except for those who have died, of course, and for those who have told us that they never want to participate again. But aside from that, even if they haven't answered a survey since wave 1, we try to find them and ask them to fill out the survey. And 3/4 of the folks in wave 6 will be getting a web survey. 1/4 will be doing in-person survey. And the reason for the in-person is the second line. We're collecting a lot of cognitive, sensory, and physical functioning measures, things like hand grips, hearing tests, eye tests, olfactory. We're giving people is this like a scratch and sniff? Is this lemon? Is this motor oil? Is this cinnamon, and so forth? Because one of the things that happens with loss of cognition over time is loss of sense of smell as well. So we're really thinking about these measures of aging that we're going to be able to collect data on for people over time, and thinking about disparities in those kind of measures as well. We're collecting venous blood samples from anybody who consents to those, so we can do all the biomarker testing. We'll have archived blood as well for the user community to apply to use for whatever assays that they want to test for. Mortality surveillance, when people die, we collect their death records. We're collecting birth records of sampled members, so we can have kind of a life to death data on everybody. Contextual data from multiple levels, really focusing on wave 6, structural racism, structural sexism measures, structural heterosexism, nativism, so that we can better understand people as they're aging, moving through space and time, and in these contexts of racism and so forth. And then ancillary studies I mentioned below. These are studies that you can apply to use the blood archive or add contextual measures to add health. We work with you on those kind of things for people who want to add to the data that's already available. And many researchers have done that over the years. We have a whole process for doing that. So the data ETA is 2025 for wave 6 data. It's going to be super exciting. We're in the field right now. Things are going pretty well. It's really hard to collect data in this context, but we're actually doing quite well with the web survey right now. And in 2024, we'll be doing all the in-person. So every day I log on and see how we're doing with the surveys. And that's kind of my panic moment first thing in the morning for this. That's what we are. So if I have more time later, I'll show you some of the measures that we're collecting in Wave 6, but I know that's for now, that's it. And then we'll turn to Lucy for the example of an empirical study using ad health data, but I'm happy to answer questions, talk about Wave 6 further. If there's none. I have no idea how to transfer things to Lucy.
Just stop sharing here and then Lucy, you can share through the computer. Just a quick clarifying question. Does Ad Help have questions related to household size and household specific?
Household size, yes, we have a whole household roster. Every wave, we collect data on not only the individual, but who's in the household. Limited information on other people, but who's in the household, their ages, their sex, their new in Wave 6, we're collecting racial and ethnic identity for household members as well. So you can get a better sense of the composition of households.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today and for giving me the chance to share with you. Just going to go over how my colleague Anna Zamora-Kapoor and I used ad health data to study risk factors in adolescents for the development of elevated blood pressure and hypertension in American Indian and Alaska Native adults. So the brief agenda is just kind of a little bit background on why we're doing this study and how to approach risk factors for hypertension. I'll, share our aim and hypothesis, some of the methods, highlight some of the results, and a brief discussion, limitations and conclusions. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was, why are we studying hypertension? And why are we, eventually I'll get to the point of why are we doing this with ad health data? So the group that I work with and my colleague Anna Zamora-Kapoor, we have a focus on working with American Indian, Alaska Native, and other indigenous communities. And we know that American Indian and Alaska Native youth have 1.5 times more likely to be obese. They also have 1.3 times the higher prevalence rate of hypertension. And hypertension is a major risk factor for cardiovascular disease, for kidney disease, and also for stroke. And these all have pretty high disease burdens in American Indian, Alaska Native communities. And so, we know that obesity is a risk factor for hypertension, but there's also, a number of other kind of behavioral and also kind of family level risk factors. These include, family history of hypertension or CVD, smoking, sedentary behaviors, diet, physical activity, household income, or socioeconomic status, among others. But the bulk of the research has been done on adult samples, and we know that there's already a burden among in youth. So we wanted to look at how are kind of over the life course, what kind of are some of the behavioral and family inherited risk factors that create this kind of outsized burden. So the first step, and of course, in any research study is to define the research question. So here we're really interested in looking at how behavioral and inherited or characteristics of adolescence were associated with development of hypertension in early or young adulthood. And so when I say, adolescence, we're talking middle school and high school, and then how that kind of lays the groundwork or is associated with hypertension in early adulthood. And we wanted to look at this by race and ethnicity because there's been some, evidence in literature to show that some of these associations might be different by race, ethnicity, and specifically with the focus on American Indian, Alaska Native adults. And put more precisely, the aim of this study was to examine the association of risk factors for elevated blood pressure and hypertension in American Indian, Alaska Native adolescents, and then to compare those estimates to 3 other racial and ethnic groups that were available in the ad health study, non-Hispanic white, non-Hispanic Black, and Hispanic adolescents. And we hypothesized that the associations between risk factors and elevated blood pressure and hypertension would differ for American Indian, Alaska Native adolescents compared to the other groups we're looking at. So we had our research question, and how do we look at it? So, with American Indian, Alaska Natives, communities. They're really all over the country, but they're smaller in number. But they've been here, they're still here, and they're experience a lot of health disparities, but it's kind of a harder group to do research on, or research with. So we needed to find, the right data set, and then also, identify the right methods to do this. And so AdHealth is, as was discussed earlier, as one of the longest and largest cohort studies. And it does include, because it's nationally representative, it includes all these different groups of races and ethnicities that we were interested in. And then it also collects this really rich, really rich and deep assortment of different kinds of, measures and variables that we could kind of use to look at, if we're looking at characteristics, then also behavioral factors. So the exposures that we wanted to look at were some, just simple demographics, and then also behavioral risk factors in adolescents. So we used some exposure variables from waves 1 and waves 2, and then the outcomes that we were looking at were elevated blood pressure and hypertension, and that was captured in wave 4. And so in order to address our research questions, the methods we used were, of course, we first just kind of like, describe the sample. And then we also conducted relative risk regressions, all stratified, both that and all of our models were stratified by race and ethnicity, because we really wanted to compare across these different groups of adolescents. And then all of our analyses were, of course, weighted and adjusted for the complex survey design of AdHealth, as Robert mentioned, that it's originally a school-based study. It's not a simple random sample, so there's a lot of weighting and adjusting that you need to do to, adjust for the way that the sample came to be. So this is, I think, a kind of a dated graphic from the AdHealth website at this point, but this kind of shows, because this is going through wave 5, which now wave 6 is in process, but this kind of gives you a sense of and it was already shown, but a sense of which variables we use. So we used adolescent and parental demographics, and then behaviors from waves 1. We took fast food consumption, which was kind of one of our exposure variables, like a behavioral variable that was in wave 2, and then we used blood pressure, which was from wave 4. Blood pressure measurements. So I gotta move my things around so I can see this a little bit better. So here's just to jump into the results. This is just the table 1 that describes, our study sample, and again, stratified by race and ethnicity. And so here I just wanted to highlight that, we do see here that American Indian Alaska Native youth have the highest prevalence of obesity of any of these groups. And then also the next thing is, if you look at the parental risk factors, we also see that that's kind of mirrored among the parents. So, nearly 1/3 of parents of American Indian Alaska Native youth are also obese. So we're kind of getting at some of that burden of obesity in this population. And then we also include in this just kind of our outcome variables. So these were, assessed at wave 4, but we see here that among American Indian Alaska Natives, already more than a quarter have hypertension in early adulthood, which is higher than any of the other groups that we were looking at. Okay, so here is results. This is table 2 from that show the results of the relative risk regressions we did, showing incident rate ratios between risk factors in adolescents, and then looking at pre-hypertensive blood pressure. So they're not already it's not hypertension, but it's an elevated blood pressure. And you can see that across groups, and these are all the adjusted models, so all of these variables that you see here are included. So you can see here that female sex is protective against elevated blood pressure for all groups. So that was one kind of key finding. So that was one of the things we're looking at, like, we were hypothesizing that there were different risk factors by racial and ethnic group, but also, some could be common. So it appears that for elevated blood pressure, at least, female sex is consistently associated with lower risk. And then for non-Hispanic Black youth, having a parent who had at least a high school education was also conferred a reduced risk of elevated blood pressure. And then this is table 3, which is same as similar to table 2. It's just showing as opposed to elevated blood pressure, the outcome here is hypertension. So results of relative risk regressions, and again, all adjusted. And here again, we see that female sex is still protective and is associated with a reduced risk. hypertension, and that's consistent across groups. And then we also see that body mass index percentile, which we modeled as a percentile, is associated with a increased risk of hypertension, and it's significantly associated for all groups, but it's just slightly higher for American Indians, Alaska Natives. And then the other thing I wanted to highlight is that this issue of parental obesity was associated with an increased relative risk for non-Hispanic white youth, and not for any others. There was no significant associations. But then kind of the biggest finding from this was that we saw that this measure of financial instability was, which was, taken in adolescence, that was measured in adolescence, that was almost doubled the risk of hypertension in later adulthood. So that was kind of one of the stronger associations that we observed. So, this is just one example of something that you could do using, data from different waves. We were really interested in kind of looking at risk factors for elevated blood pressure and hypertension. This isn't my background area, but this was Anna's, so we were working together to do this. The jumping off point for this was because, previous research had been done that really looked at, that showed that maybe some of these differences, there are different risk factors across these different groups. And for all groups, we found that female sex is a protective factor and increasing BMI is a risk factor. And then importantly, as I just mentioned, for American Indian Alaska Native youth living in a, financially unstable household was associated with increased hypertension later in life. Parental obesity was significantly associated with increased risk for non-Hispanic white youth, and parental education was protective against elevated blood pressure, so that pre-hypertensive state for non-Hispanic Black youth. And then interestingly, we thought maybe some of the behavioral variables, which is like one of the really cool things that, AdHealth asked about too, in addition to all the other information, we thought that those were going to be, we hypothesized that there would be some, differences there, and none of them were associated with either our outcomes that we looked at. So moving forward, this is something important to consider, that any interventions that are targeting hypertension in American Indian Alaska Native communities really need to, include and consider some socioeconomic factors, probably maybe do some community level interventions as well. And then I think it's just also, important to consider, like, from these kinds of analyses, we can learn like the extent to which research and interventions can be used, or, the same across populations, because if risk factors are different, probably the point of intervention and the way that you intervene is also differently. And then just thinking about like future research, we need to maybe, better understand why female sex is a protective factor. I know that's becoming a more priority with NIH funding of looking, sex as a biological factor and how it differs at long last. We're exploring that a little bit more. And so kind of sex specific analyses. And then, there's some other things that are probably, happening in these kind of associations that we weren't able to capture, but thinking about neighborhood environment, access to care, and then also we know that like cultural factors, or especially when we're focusing on tribal and Native communities and Indigenous populations, those are major things that we need to consider. There were some limitations, of course, with everything. So we didn't have, because it wasn't part of what AdHealth measured. Hopefully I'm right about that. I'm not going to be corrected by Robert, but it didn't measure hypertension outcomes among parents, and that might have been helpful, something to consider as well, especially if there's, we had kind of a proxy with parental obesity, but it's kind of a rough proxy. It's not as specific as we might have wanted. And then American Indian and Alaska Native Hispanic youth were not oversampled. So we did have somewhat of a small sample, but we think it was enough and we still got some interesting results. Also, there was only one blood pressure reading, and, doing blood pressure assessments typically you could want to do more than one. And also it would have been great to have it at different waves as well. And then, of course, for BMI, and then for fast food consumption and sedentary habits and physical activity, those were self-reported. So they were probably subject somewhat to social desirability bias. So that's kind of where our research was, but I also want to say, and I kind of skipped over it earlier because I wanted everyone to have enough time for questions, but I just wanted to say that if you, like the others said, if you don't know AdHealth, it's a really, really, really rich data set. And if you don't know, chances are there's something in there that you would be interested in looking at. and exploring. And this is the data set for you. It's extremely user-friendly, both in terms of through the enclave at UW specifically, or also if, outside of just, on your computers now, you can look at the AdHealth webpage and just kind of dive in there. And then if you, decide to use it and you're trying to do an analysis, there's so much documentation. That's one of the beauties of federally funded research like this, that in addition to collecting the information, they have to make it user-friendly. And most questions that you would have, you can easily find an answer for, which I really, really appreciate. And as you do more analyses, that becomes more true. And especially if you collect your own data, which you probably won't end up with the level of documentation that AdHealth has. It's kind of a best practice in how to collect data. It's just really rich. Again, there's lots in there. And then there's always just more to explore. It's always changing. I mean, I learned a lot just today in some of the things that were talked about. And it's really dynamic. And it's, like they said, I mean, it was originally just to look at adolescent health, and now it also captures adult health. So it's just a really great data set. I can't recommend it more. So just to briefly say, so this was funded by, this work was funded by the National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparities. The co-authors on this paper were Morgan Montañez, Kaini Sinclair, and Deidre Buchwald, in addition to Anna Zamora Kapoor, who couldn't be here. And then this just a little bit about our research program. So, and that's it. I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, we have time for some questions. It looks like there's a few in the Q&A, so let's take a look at those.
I think I might have addressed one of them already, which was that clarifying question.
It's probably for you. Does it hold questions relating to household size, which is yes, and homelessness?
Well, yes, Sydney, question, I don't know if you had homelessness, but my sense is probably not. But if you could look at the navigator.
I was actually looking at the navigator. I couldn't find homelessness on there in the short period of time I've had a chance to look at, but that doesn't mean it's not there, but I don't think we have it. I do know the household roster, like he said, is very extensive.
I'm not sure if you mentioned, does Wave 6 include a COVID module? And also if you could summarize, you said it was representative of who's in high school in the 90s. Could you summarize who that doesn't represent for me?
Sure. So on the first question, COVID module, yes. So Wave 5 was collected 2016 to 2018, so pre-COVID. We were writing proposals in March 2020 as COVID hit. And so we got COVID module into the proposals as funded. So we have not only questions for survey questions for COVID, but we have one of our assays. I don't know how they do this, but I guess you can tell from the blood if people have ever had COVID or not. So we get people saying, have they have COVID? How many times? How many vaccinations have they had? A couple of questions about experiences of what happened during COVID or something. But then we'll have the blood tests as well for whether or not people have had COVID. So your second question then was
Who does it not represent?
not represent. Okay, so yeah, this is people who were in high schools and middle schools in the mid 1990s. To be more specific, it was from the rosters of those schools. So clearly there's people who were typically in more 11th or 12th grade who had left school, dropped out, and were not on the rosters at that time. It's very small percentage because even most people who leave school will initially be on the rosters for those years. So it's an empirical question. At some point, we'll have to reanalyze who's still remaining in the data, who's not. But the early analysis back from the mid 1990s suggested that AdHealth lined up pretty well with data like from the CPS and other data sets that were household based at the time. So we're missing a few folks, but not that many. But to be more precise, it's representative of adolescents who were in middle schools and high schools in the mid 1990s, more specifically on those rosters.
Just to continue on that, does that mean like high schools could be public schools, private schools, charter schools, alternative schools, and with only 80 high schools in your sample, how did you make the determination of what types of high schools and how many need to be included? I assume you have each type of those high schools, but then geographically, like, can you talk a little bit about that process at all?
Sure. So there were, I wasn't involved at the time, but here's what I know. So there was a list of all close to 27,000 high schools in the country at the time. Private, public, weren't many at the time, charter or anything, but private, small, large, urban, rural, so forth. And so the idea was not just to pick 80 every 100th one or something like that, but there was a stratified sample done of, they wanted to get both urban and rural high schools, schools from different regions of the country, schools with different racial and ethnic mixes, and so forth. So it was a complex design to choose those high schools. And so all of those types of schools are represented in the data set. So there are some very large high schools and students from very large high schools in health, as well as students from very much smaller schools and from all over different parts of the country as well. So it was a very strategic design to try to include kids from all of those different kinds of schools. And then of course, one feeder school for each of those. Sometimes there was no feeder school, it was just that like there was a K through 12 school. So they just included the kids who were in 7 through 9. But then other times there was a middle school or junior high school attached to those high schools where those grades. So it was grades 7 through 12 in each of those 80 communities.
I do have a quick thing to say. I apologize before there's another question. To answer the homelessness question, there is at least 2 questions asked about homelessness, I believe at wave 3. I did finally find it. So, sorry.
Looks like someone might have put something in the chat. Bill, if you want to check that.
About the slideshow. I did want to mention, if you want access to the copy of the data set that we have, waves 1 through 5, you can you'll see my contact information. You can contact me and I can help you get set up with that. I should also mention that we don't have all of the data sets for 1 through 5. There are a number of data sets that continue to come online and are made available as they're prepared. What that all requires is just justification of your research prospectus. And so far, we have had no people denied access to any data sets. And usually the request cycle is only a week or 2 between when you request access to the data and when you actually get approval. Also, if you're doing research of your own, if you're a student doing research of your own that includes highly sensitive information, there's an option for you to use the UW Data Collaborative to host those data so that you don't have to deal with your own security environment. We take care of all of that for you and make sure that everything is very secure and that you would have 24/7 access from around the world.
Let's say thank you again to our wonderful panel. Just a reminder, if you're a student registered for the class and you didn't sign in, please sign in and please join us next week for our lightning talks.
Cindy, Lucy, thank you.
Dad,
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Thank you, Bob, for all your help.
Thank you all for your patience with our technical setup here.
Bye.
And thank you to all of the visiting sociology prospective students who joined us today. How exciting. Yeah, that was the big group that came in.